If you were hoping that Donald Trump would choose Sarah Palin or a Nikki Haley or maybe a Ben Carson as his vice presidential candidate, you're better prepared to be disappointed because he has a very specific set of qualifications that he and his campaign are using to determine who should be the VP, and it's of the sort that will make conservatives very happy. His campaign manager says the campaign probably won't choose a woman or a member of a minority group. That would be viewed as pandering, I think. I love that they just blanket say no women, no minorities.
Yeah, I mean, look,
which is the subtext of every Republican candidacy up until this point, but they're actually saying it.
But it's, okay, so I think that statement is a double-edged sword because on one hand, I mean, it makes you look like you have no interest in working with anyone other than white men, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think that type of honesty is what appeals to the Trump voters, right? Nah, we don't give a fuck about pandering. We don't give a fuck about playing by the rules. I mean, think about that compared to what Hillary Clinton does, where she makes statements about how she likes to have hot sauce in her bag, you know, to appeal to black voters. I mean, that type of pandering turns a lot of people off. And I think the reason why a lot of Trump supporters like him is because even though he's incredibly dishonest and deceptive, he somehow comes off as honest because he and his campaign make these crazy statements that most politicians wouldn't have the balls to say.
They just say awful things.
They say awful things and people are like, you know what? I appreciate that honesty. Yeah. It's incredible. It's incredible how it works.
So to go on, Paul Manafort, who's the campaign chair, said he needs an experienced person to do the job, the part of the job that he doesn't want to do. This is what they're going to choose based on. He sees himself more as the chairman of the board than even the CEO, let alone the COO, which is shorthand for he just wants to move pieces around. He doesn't want to actually think about any of the numbers, any of the dollar figures, any of the policies, any of that. But if you're just the guy who's telling people what to do, choosing people, he always says, I'm going to choose the right people. He just cut out 75, 80% of all the people in the country that he could conceivably choose out of the politicians. That doesn't seem like a good chairman of the board. That seems like a chairman of the board who, by the way, in this case, they say it would be viewed as pandering. Not that it would be pandering. So they're not going to choose people who are the best for the job just because some people might think it's pandering. Do you really want someone in charge who is going to say, that's the best person, but I might get criticized, so I'm not actually going to allow them to do the job? That seems like weakness to me.
Also, changing gears a little bit, isn't it also kind of interesting how there's a lack of transparency in our system? And what I mean by that is when you're voting for a candidate in the primaries, you have no idea who he or she is going to pick as their VP. Shouldn't we know from the get-go? Shouldn't we be as informed as possible about these candidates, what their intentions are, who they plan on running with, right from the beginning in the primaries? Doesn't that make more sense?
You mean they should say who they would want?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I hate that they play coy. I hate that they refuse to answer questions about things like that. I hate that it's a guessing game. It's important to know as much as possible about these candidates as you're voting for them in the primaries, because I would argue the primaries are more important than the general election. In the primaries, you have more of an option, right?
Yes, you do.
And people, unfortunately, don't understand how important primaries are because of, low turnout rates and things like that. But it's important to have as much information as possible. I want to know who they plan on picking. I want to know who they pick from the very beginning.
Yeah. And by the way, the final thing I want to say about this, it's bullshit. I mean, would it be viewed as pandering? Well, maybe theoretically, but you also could be a leader. You could come out and introduce the person, say all the reasons they're qualified. You could choose someone who is actually qualified, someone who everyone would look at it and say, oh, that makes sense. Of course you want that person. They've led a state or they've led businesses or whatever bullshit you would come up with. Then it wouldn't be seen as pandering. You're just saying it would be viewed as pandering. You also have, by the way, a very low opinion of your audience, of the people that follow you, that they would assume that any woman would be pandering. It's not even true, by the way. There are women that he could choose that they would love. If he chose Sarah Palin, they're morons. They would love a Sarah Palin choice. They would not say that it was pandering. I would say that it was pandering, but I don't think that he would actually care about that. So it's bullshit front to back. And also, it's probably not true. They're saying they're not going to choose a woman and a member of a minority group because it would be viewed as pandering. In the Trump campaign, that tells me he is heavily considering choosing a minority woman as his VP candidate.
Really?
Look, he might still choose like Christie or something like that, but this is exactly the sort of game that he plays all the time. He comes out and says, I don't want no women and I don't want no minorities, so that will spread out there and all the dumb hicks that support him will be like, yes, stand against PC culture. And then he chooses a minority woman, and they're like, good for you. Choose the person they didn't say you would choose.
Oh, my God.
He gets to have his cake and eat it, too.
By the way, I stopped listening to your argument after you mentioned Chris Christie, because poor Chris Christie, I mean, he made a complete fool out of himself, and there's a huge possibility, actually, it's likely, that he's not going to be the VP pick. Just think about him standing awkwardly behind Trump, oh my God, in a press conference, and he's still probably not going to be the VP pick. Look,
he could be, but lower than 50% chance.
Yeah, and look, I did listen to the rest of your argument. I'm lying.
Oh, thank you.
And I hear what you're saying. I mean, he's one massive case study of saying one thing and doing the other. So
Yeah.
it's possible that he could be a wild card in the case of choosing a VP and could be a minority woman. Who knows? Who knows? All I know is all of that is irrelevant because Donald Trump is a nightmare.
Yeah, that's true.
Doesn't matter who his VP is. And by the way, if you really want to focus on what a VP does, it's very little. So, I mean, I want to know who someone's VP pick is going to be in the, terrible case that something might happen to the president and that person might end up being the president. But at the same time, I mean, when you have a candidate as disastrous as Trump, whatever pick he has is totally irrelevant to me.
Yeah.